Yuan China mempunyai kesan yang lebih besar ke atas pasaran bermuncul dan juga sedang pesat membangun berbanding sebelum ini dan mungkin memainkan peranan penting dalam menentukan prestasi mereka pada tahun akan datang. Korelasi mata wang itu dengan indeks MSCI negara membangun yang setara meningkat kepada rekod pada bulan September tahun lepas setiap minggu sebelum susut sedikit di tengah-tengah wabak Omicron yang menular dan juga peningkatan pengaruh Yuan di peringkat global yang semakin meningkat adalah satu lagi tanda hubungan China yang semakin mendalam berentasi ekonomi dunia. Pelabur semakin tertarik kepada bonnya sebagai alternatif kepada Perbendaharaan Amerika Syarikat manakala beberapa bank menyeru agar Yuan menyertai Dolar Amerika, Euro dan juga Yen sebagai mata wang rizab global. Segmen Ekonomi Makro minggu ini kita berikan tumpuan kepada prestasi Yuan. Kita bersama dengan Shan Saeed, Ketua Pakar Ekonomi Juwai IQI. Good morning Shan. Thank you so much for joining us. Shan, you have been saying for quite a while in press and also in media that Chinese Yuan is the currency for the emerging markets. What's the premise and history and the future action? I know you are a big fan of Yuan and have been following since 2010, Shan.
Yes, 11 years back, I was in New York and I was talking about Chinese Yuan. And the topic of my presentation was Chinese Yuan currency for the emerging markets. And most of those investors, 150, 200 investors who were sitting in New York, they were laughing at me. And the only person who was, listening to me very carefully was my Nobel laureate professor who flew down from Chicago to New York, late Professor Nobel laureate Gary Becker. And he was the only one who believed in my insight. Fast forward 30th November 2015, Chinese Yuan was included in the elite basket of currencies with IMF. And on 30th September 2016, Chinese Yuan went live. Fast forward last year, Chinese Yuan appreciated 2.5% against US dollar. All the currencies were taking the beating, but Chinese Yuan has been quite, it has stood ground and it has really appreciated because the economy is booming. And the way I see markets, I think Yuan will eventually become the currency, especially for emerging markets, and many countries in the emerging markets are now looking at Chinese Yuan to have an alternative. Because US dollar has been, having a rough ride in the last 5 to 6 years. And the monetary policy has been quite, behind the scenes. Fed has been, behind the scenes. Inflation is showing its head. Inflation is not stopping. So I think investors are now seriously considering to have Yuan in their portfolio. And many central banks are now thinking to have Yuan in their foreign reserve. So I am quite optimistic and quite bullish on Chinese Yuan. That's why 11 years back, what I said, it still holds ground and it's still making news in the market.
Shan, USA has always called Chinese government as currency manipulator, dumping cheap items into USA. Is there a truth or in that, or this is another James Bond story from USA during Obama administration? And are there any criteria attached to currency manipulation?
Yes, Najib, since 2014, during Obama administration, they have been calling China as the currency manipulator, which is not true. Economist magazine ran an article in 2017 on the 11th March issue, and they analyzed whether Chinese Yuan is a currency manipulator or not. And there are three basic criteria that US Treasury has set. Those measures are: number one, a country runs a sizable trade surplus with US. Number two, the current account surplus is 3% above GDP. And the country has buying 2% a year foreign assets, which suppresses her currency. In all of these three criterion, Chinese Yuan just meet one, and the other criteria do not hold good. The only country that came out in that article was a currency manipulator was South Korean won, which is a close ally of US. So I think many people in Capitol Hill and in Senate in US, they were saying that Chinese Yuan is undervalued by 40%. But since they don't understand the markets, they don't understand how finance and economics actually work, they don't really know what is happening in the market. In fact, Chinese Yuan has been in line with market forces since 2007 till 2014. Chinese Yuan appreciated 35% against USD. And only in 2015, Chinese yuan went down on 28th July, and on 10th August, when it went down by 2% and 1%, the whole market, shook up, and they thought Chinese yuan would go down. And at that time, People's Bank of China injected $300 billion in the market. And everybody was saying that Chinese yuan would collapse, and it will be a time for China, to join a new currency. But all these, narratives have been wrong. And Economist magazine, which comes out of London, even if they are saying that it is not China, which is South Korea, that is the biggest currency manipulator. It really puts things in perspective that what US has been saying about China has been wrong, and they don't really actually know the markets movement, the trade policies, and the economic outlook of many economies. So I think China is not the currency manipulator. It is the South Korean won, according to Economist magazine, that has been the currency manipulator.
Okay, Shan, fast forward, we have seen in present time during Russia Ukraine war, sanctions on Russia and banning them from SWIFT. And in China, they have chips which is used by Chinese banks and many others. How do you foresee the market accepting yuan in that sense?
Yes, sanctions have been counterproductive. It will harm Russia, but it won't cripple Russia, as reported in Economist magazine. Most of the Russian banks, they are moving away from SWIFT, and they are going to China Border Interbank Payment System, that is called CIPS. And right now there are 80 banks. I wouldn't be surprised that after this war gets over, where the many, according to diplomatic channels, there are a lot of things going on. This war might be over soon. Russia might demand, there's a scenario that a lot of banks are talking about, Russia might demand Europe to make most of the oil payment not in US dollar, but either in Chinese yuan, Russian ruble, or gold. If Russia goes with this strategy, I think that will be a huge dent to US dollar. And again, it will promote Chinese yuan. So if most of the Europe, which gets 50% of its oil and gas from Russia, they start making a payment in yuan, just imagine yuan is going to appreciate further. That's why I said, I'm quite bullish and optimistic about the outlook of Chinese yuan, which is currency for the emerging markets.
Shan, do you think that yuan will be recognized and will be joining the US dollar, euro, and yen as the global reserve currency?
Absolutely, Rizal. When 30th November 2015, yuan was included in the elite basket of currencies called SDR with IMF. It clearly signifies that yuan has got strength, and it has shown that it has got a global status. That's why it has joined the elite basket of currencies, and that's why Petro Yuan, which I have been talking about since November 2014 in one of the magazines called Smart Investor, in which I have written that Petro Yuan will eventually come, and it will run parallel with petrodollar. So a lot of Arab countries are also thinking to have their payments in yuan. Russia is ready. Once the war gets over, there are scenarios created by various American banks. Petro yuan will come into the market, and it will be happening very soon.
And also, Shan, finally, what's happening on March 16, 2022? Is Fed raising rates by 25 basis points or 50 basis points in that sense, maybe?
Yes, inflation is having a run, and eventually Fed, which has been behind the curve, will raise interest rates. I see 25 basis points going up day after tomorrow, 16 March, and that will create a real bazooka and turmoil in the financial market, especially in the equity and bond market. So I think 25 basis points very much on the cards.
How do the other economies, especially the emerging economies such as Malaysia, will react to this?
I think the markets will see. I don't see a lot of things happening in the emerging markets. A lot of investment is now coming in emerging markets. Investment is leaving US because the investors believe that Fed is nervous. They don't know how to control inflation. Last February, the inflation was running at 1.6%. Last figures in February, inflation is running at 7.9%, over 300% jump in almost a year. It clearly shows that Fed has been behind the curve. They don't know. They have been wrong about inflation since last year. I have been sharing with your ex-colleague Rizal that this inflation is serious. This inflation is not temporary. or transitory. And once inflation gets serious and stubborn, obviously the markets start pricing in that Fed is behind the curve, and eventually they move out of the equity and bond market. And bond market, the worst asset class to be in. So I think Malaysia can stand the pressure of Fed raising interest rates going forward.
We don't see the war in Ukraine to be subside but anytime soon. But do you think that the inflation will go to a level that we've never seen before?
Absolutely, Najib. The way things are shaping up, inflation will stay for the next 2 years. We are in stagflationary environment, globally speaking. History repeats after 52 years. Global economy will only recover in 2025. The next 2 to 3 years, there will be inflation in agriculture, there will be inflation in food prices, and there will be inflation in energy market.
All right, Shan, thank you so much. I'll send my regard to Rizal later. I'll miss him too. Thank you so much, Shan, for joining us this morning. Tadi Shan Saeed, Ketua Pakar Ekonomi Juwai IQI. Kita membincangkan faktor ekonomi dan juga Yuan pada ketika ini. Ini semua kita akan rangkumkan di laman web kami astroawani.com. Kita akan berhenti rehat sekali lagi kembali selepas ini.